ANC has held a two-day land summit in Boksburg. It's changed its tune on land expropriation without compensation, saying there's nothing preventing government from implementing the policy. The governing party is now calling on government to go ahead and take back the land without compensation where it can. Despite this, however, there's still matters that need clarity. Well, author of The Land is Ours, Advocate Tembeka Ngcukaitobi, joins us now. Good evening, sir. Thanks very much for coming through. Well, from what Enoch Kotongwana told journalists today, you really schooled the ANC this past weekend. What did you tell them?
No, I couldn't have schooled the ANC at all. I myself am a student of the ANC's history. I just made a contribution about perspectives that exist, but I was schooled by the ANC rather than the other way around.
So shouldn't believe Enoch Kotongwana?
No, absolutely. He is being too kind, but I was schooled by the ANC myself. What I did say, though, on a serious note, is that the question of land must be approached in an expansive way. It's a folly to talk only of expropriation, whether it is with or without compensation. We've got to understand that expropriation is a subset of a larger discussion on land. The second point that I tried to emphasize is that we've got to exploit the constitutional space, what David Makura called the transformative impulse of the Constitution. We've got to make use of it where it is possible. And then the third critical contribution that I think I made is to suggest to the ANC that it is within its power to pass legislation, sometimes legislation that limits provisions that are in the Constitution, and that is perfectly compatible with the structure of the Constitution. And the land reform debate can be taken aggressively within the parameters of the Constitution.
Now, we're going to get into the points you raised in a short while, but I just wanted to get a sense from you that there's always that uncomfortable thing that the ANC has about this, or always, maybe one should say, runs away from, and the fact that it has dismally failed on this issue. Was that admission made sufficiently at that summit? In other words, did they start by saying, how did we get to this position where none of us are happy with how we have done over the past 20-odd years?
Yeah, I came to the conference as a presenter, as an outsider in a sense. But I made the position quite clear from where I stand as an outsider that there has been a failure. Take one example. Land redistribution, which is a critical component of land reform. It is common cause that there is no national legislation. And there should have been national legislation for 24 years. There's no national legislation. So it doesn't matter what admissions are made. The objective reality is that there's no national legislation. Take another instance, which is land restitution. The fact that the figures that are bandied about of land restituted in relation to those claims that fall after the 19th of June 1913, the fact that the figures range between 7% and 9% is objective reality. And it doesn't matter whether or not one admits that or does not admit, it's an objective reality. And take the institutional failures. This came quite clearly in the report presented by former President Kgalema Motlanthe. And again, those are objective figures that are just common ground. And I think, generally speaking, everybody accepts that there has been a slow pace and then sometimes total dismal failures in relation to land reform.
But is it not important to make those admissions? Yes, I hear you talking about the objective reality, the numbers speak for themselves. But can't one make a case and say, it is important for that admission to be made and made openly, so that whatever gets then prescribed, as what needs to happen beyond this point, happens within the context of admission, so that the ANC doesn't then, or whoever for that matter, doesn't then get to subscribe things that they don't even need, because they are running away from admitting their failures.
This is my view, that there have been these failures, and this view stands to be supported by the Motlanthe report, and it's also just objective reality. Whether the ANC should or should not admit is not really, it's not really for me to say, but it's certainly my view that there has been those failures.
But what about, I mean, because there has been a great deal of emphasis on the, expropriation without compensation. But as you and other people have pointed out before, there are a whole range of other things that have actually led to this failure of the ANC to deal with the land question.
No, precisely. I mean, we shouldn't run away from the question of compensation, because land is expensive in South Africa. And land prices are increasingly getting more and more expensive as a result of several factors. When landowners learn that the government is interested in a particular piece of ground for purposes of redistribution, they tend to shoot up the prices artificially. So it is one of the blockages that there is a lot of money being spent on land reform. When I asked the Minister of Land Affairs a couple of weeks ago at Gibbs how much money the government had spent since 1994, she told me the figure was 54 billion rands. So land is expensive, and so one needs to calibrate the mechanisms of how one pays for land. So it is a critical aspect. But it's true at the same time that land reform cannot be reduced to questions of expropriation. Expropriation is simply a mechanism to enable the state to acquire land for purposes of wider redistribution. So I agree with you that there is the problem of how much the state pays for land, but there is also just the problem of the institutional collapse that has led in the failure of the state to even acquire land. And then, of course, once the land has been acquired, there's another problem, which is usage of the land. I mean, the figures that are getting bandied about the extent to which when people have acquired the land, they are able then to make it a commercial success. So all of those factors need to be factored into the discussion about land reform.
But then, I mean, still on that point, what about, yes, you're talking about how expensive land is and what people tend to do when they hear that government is interested in whatever piece of land that they may have or have access to. But what about corruption and the collusion, where self-interest as well, where now people who are close or who are in the know then tend to want to influence those processes so that they get to benefit, and corruption also coming in?
No, certainly, it is also my experience. I've seen instances where when you look at the deal that has been struck in the end, you can't but conclude that there has been a malevolent hand influencing the process. And I think even the Motlanthe report actually does illustrate that part of the problem has been corruption. But one must remember that corruption does not only emanate from bureaucrats in the government. Corruption emanates sometimes from landowners. Corruption sometimes emanates from land claimants, and sometimes corruption emanates from government bureaucrats. So it again becomes a multifaceted problem. So if one wants to tackle it, one needs an expansive strategy. But we've got to always remember that we've got to find a way in which land prices are not as high as they are. And hence the debate on expropriation without compensation is actually a welcome debate.